Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of HPA Global Insights. Today, I'm joined by my friend Amanda Mao. Amanda is the founder and managing director of Acurit Medical Communications, and she is in Australia at the moment. Amanda, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, Jeff.
There you are. Yeah, so
Yeah,
you're in
glad to be
Australia.
here.
What's that?
Glad to be here.
Oh, very well. I'm glad to have you. This is great. So you're down there in Australia enjoying the winter while we're here in Texas burning up in the summertime.
That's right.
So, for those people that are watching that have not had the pleasure to meet you, can you just give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Jeff. As Jeff introduced, I'm Amanda Mao. I'm founder and managing director of Acurit, and I actually live in Australia for the last 10 years. What we do, part of what we do is we help Western nutrition companies with end-to-end clinical trials in China. And I guess that's what we are going to talk about. And after the trial is done, we also help with scientific publication. So a little bit about myself is I got my PhD in biochemistry and molecular nutrition in the US. And then I returned to China to work for 8 years in the nutrition and pharmaceutical industries. So interestingly, my first job in China was managing a nutrition trial.
Oh, okay. So you've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's dive into some questions about this because clinical trials are very important, but not all nutrition companies tend to do them. So if a company is considering doing this, like why should a nutrition company, a global nutrition company, consider doing a trial in China?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff. A simple answer is to publish. Then we would ask why publish? Because we want to publish so that your product can be promoted ethically and scientifically, compliantly in a scientific journal. So let me share with you some of the background. Um, as we know, I actually don't need to tell your audience, Jeff, how big China is in terms of the health supplements, in terms of infant formula, that's how big a market is. Your audience will already know. And I just want to mention that of in terms of export to China, in terms of health supplements, the US, Australia, and Germany are the top three countries exporting to China. So that links to the question of why they should do nutrition trials, as I mentioned, to publish. But there are also some other benefits because, for example, a global nutrition company would like to engage with top Chinese healthcare professionals and principal investigators. And doing clinical nutrition trial is a good way to engage with them because they will be part of the team. They will be the researchers of the trial, and then they are always very open to collaborate with you, discuss with you. And also nowadays, it's also important to engage with the local consumers, the Chinese consumers, because in general, the Chinese healthcare professionals and consumers, they are savvy. They wanted to know more about the scientific credibility about your product, right? And
Mhm.
then doing a nutrition trial is an excellent way because then this way you run a trial in China and then you enroll Chinese participants. And I also wanted to add that when you do a trial, normally you will do your product and a control as a comparator. So that can be an excellent way to show the efficacy because we know in China it's not always easy or to show efficacy, but then via a publication you can.
Okay. So if a company does decide to do this, what's involved in actually doing a trial in China?
Yeah, that's a good question. And running a trial can be complex, but don't be daunted. There are a number of aspects about it. First, I wanted to say that because whether it's a nutrition trial, whether it's a drug trial, they are targeting human beings. And then if it's targeting humans, then there are certain regulations to follow, certain international rules to follow. For example, ICH GCP. GCP stands for Good Clinical Practice. So in order to follow that, we for every nutrition trial, we need to go through, for example, ethics committee approval. That normally happens on a hospital level. For example, also I'm going to say an abbreviation, a abbreviated name. That's a HGRAC. That means Human Genetic Material Administration of China. So what does this do? It helps with when you do like, because we're talking about global nutrition companies, that means that's international collaboration. And then for international collaboration, a clinical trial to happen, it must go through the HGRAC. So HGRAC, Ethics Committee, they are all regulatory agencies we must go through. So that's some background. And then in terms of the trial itself, then there are several steps in broad terms. So after the approval of the regulatory agencies, and then we need to enroll the participants. And then this can be a rate limiting step. Depending on how well you do it, it can be very slow or it can be very quick. So that's a critical step in terms of the nutrition trial. And then after the enrollment kickstarts, we will start the trial. So that's the whole conduct of the trial from first patient in to last patient out, from first visit to last visit. That's all according to the protocol. Protocol is the key element of running a trial. And then also during the trial, we need to collect data. So there is a data collection and management, and then including biosample collection and management. When I say biosample, it means, for example, blood, saliva, stool. And then because we do all those things, we collect all those data. And then finally, we have two very important documents that's called statistical analysis report and clinical study report. Those two reports, based on these, we can write a manuscript for publication. So those are the steps in broad terms. And then also another aspect I want to say is that there are a number of parties that needs to be involved in a clinical trial. For example, one party is called CRO, that stands for Clinical Research Organization. And then when I say those parties, they are in China. So I have encountered both good CROs and not so good ones.
Mhm.
And very importantly, clinical study sites, usually they are hospitals. And then depending on your trial scale, you may want to engage one single hospital or you may want to engage several hospitals to do your trial. And also, there will be central lab, central laboratory that's involved. As I mentioned earlier, if you like a global nutrition company, in this case, you will be called a sponsor. So if according to the protocol, we want to collect biosamples, for example, blood, saliva, or stool, and then those samples need to be collected and need to be analyzed. So for those, we need to have a central lab. And also another important party is called they are doing statistical analysis. They are also doing data management. because nowadays we can imagine that we collect a lot of data. And then nowadays, the standard way is to collect data electronically so that we can trace the data, correct the data, everything has a trace. That's also good clinical practice. And then those statistical vendors, data management vendors are also needed. So those are just an example of all those parties involved. So it seems complex, but it can be managed according to my experience.
All right, Amanda. Well, thank you for kind of outlining all those broad steps. There is a lot in place there. Um, I think the obvious question people would have is, anytime a global company is going to deal with China, the first things are, cultural differences and obviously
Mhm.
language. And
Yeah.
there's other aspects too that have to be paid attention to. So in doing this type of work, what kind of issues, um, have you faced and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Jeff. As I mentioned, because clinical trial can be a long, lengthy, and complex process. So that's why in the whole process of a clinical trial, problem solving, risk management, vendor management are all throughout the whole duration of the trial. Um, there are a number of questions that it comes up and then you solve it, move on, another question and solve, move on, so far and so forth. Um, but here I wanted to give an example of a low enrollment rate. As I mentioned earlier, enrollment is critical because for every nutrition trial, you need to enroll, and then the enrollment speed can make or break your trial. So for a previous trial, we managed for a global nutrition company. At first, after over a year, the enrollment by the previous CRO, as I mentioned, it means clinical research organization. They help with the nutrition trial as well. We work closely with them. So the previous CRO with over a year, they only managed to enroll 5 participants. That's about 3% of the enrollment goal. So that's pretty
Wow. In
difficult
China,
situation. Yes, yes.
one of the most populous countries in the world, there's only 5 people.
I know, but I also wanted to let you know that because we are talking about nutrition trial, and then those participants are newborn babies, so
Oh,
they are
okay.
hard to recruit.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, yeah, and then at that time, actually, I was brought in to help the sponsor to um, to have this derailed trial correct, to be back on track. And then because I have a large network in China, and together with the sponsor, we changed the CRO to a new one.
Okay.
And then we also managed other vendors. I mentioned several other vendors there. And then we also, very importantly, expanded the sites, the number of hospitals, so that more hospitals will be recruiting. So with all those measures, and then I'm glad to report that the target recruitment of the newborn babies were about 200. And then with all those measures, we were able to recruit all those participants in less than 6 months. So that's a great contrast. And then because we also manage other trial aspects, so eventually the trial was completed successfully. So this example is just very itched in my head. So I wanted to give this example.
Oh, well, that's definitely a good example. So, um, what kind of advice would you have for a company that, is considering, maybe doing a trial in China?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So based on my experience, I would think mainly there will be 3 insights that I would like to share based on my experiences and learnings. First is that building trust. is very important. As a background, we know that the cultural differences between China and the rest of the world, especially in the Western countries, can be huge. So cultural differences can cause misunderstandings. And also, obviously, some political or geopolitical reasons can also cloud business relationships. So that means that building trust is even more important. So my experience is that there are three ways to build trust. Jeff, you already know this, I'm sure, that in-person meetings will be the most effective. Nothing beat it because you have lived in China for a number of years. But also nowadays, because of the international travel budget, time constraints, it's not always easy to meet in person. So in this case, video meetings will be the second best thing. And then I would recommend to have camera on. And for your audience, maybe that's obvious because from a Western culture, if you have video meetings, you will have camera on. But surprise, in China, it's not always the case. Like nowadays, I still have weekly meetings with my China teams about nutrition trials. And then even though I encourage them to turn their camera on, they still keep them off. So don't be surprised for this because they are not personal. It's because of the cultural reasons. They prefer for the camera to be off. But trust me, they are there. They are
Mm.
listening and they want to participate. So for me, I still keep my camera on because at least that shows your openness to engage with them. So that's just a little story regarding building trust that I want to share. And then also during the long-term partnerships, you would like to praise any tiny progress that the Chinese parties give. And then in the long run, it will be good to build mutual trust.
Mhm.
And then the second insight I wanted to share is it's critical to have right local partners. And in order to do that, of course, the best thing is if you go to China, attend conferences or attend trade shows. And then you can ask referral from your connections who are familiar with the Chinese market. And once you have the right local partners, you would want to have clear roles and responsibilities. So as a global nutrition company, you are welcome to do that. But otherwise, if you need help, you would like to engage with a bilingual Chinese clinical consultancy. So the third insight I wanted to share is that it's actually from a scientific prospect. Just now I mentioned that protocol is the most important document in a clinical trial. And what I would advise is that instead of for a sponsor, a global nutrition company, to write the protocol and then have it translated into Chinese, I would advise against doing it. Why? Because eventually the protocol will be used in China for a clinical trial. So what I would recommend is if the sponsor wanted to develop a protocol, first just develop some skeleton, some key strategy, some key parameters you want to test here on the protocol, and then in English. And then at that point, move it to the Chinese part for the Chinese teams to develop, to show it to the principal investigators, to the researchers, because they are the one who are going to run the trial, who will know the practice in China, who will see, okay, this is possible, this is not possible at all, things like that. And then eventually the protocol needs to go through the ethics committee for approval. And remember, everything is in Chinese. So at that point, that's why I mentioned for the last mile, you wanted for the Chinese teams to finalize the protocol. And then once it's finalized and approved, it can be translated back into English for the Western nutrition companies to keep in file. So this is really a close, collaboration between China and the global company and back and forth. So that's why it's really important. Go back to the first point to have mutual trust. So these are the three insights I will share. Just a little bit of the nutshell is that first, mutual trust. Second, right local partners in China. And third, in terms of protocol development.
Those are all very important points. And I think the first one I have come across so many
Okay.
times living in China for 14 years. Actually, I
Yes.
just recently had one of our members, the CEO, wanted to know why is it necessary for him to travel to China when he has some staff on the ground and some,
Mm,
the lower level people maybe could show up at the meetings. And it is very important. It's just to
yeah.
show, a level of commitment, that if
Yes.
you want to work with this company in China,
Yeah.
you're from North America or Europe or Australia or wherever you're from, you better go there and sit down, and have a face-to-face meeting. That's very
Yes.
important. That's very, very important.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I also tell my clients almost all the time, you should go there, even though we have the video, we have everything, but you should still strive to go there.
Yeah, because you can have a person that works for you. Say, you're in Australia, so let's just say an Australian company can have a Chinese citizen that's from China that works for them
Mm,
as, say, like a business development person, and they're running
yes.
around China,
Yeah.
making connections. But if the company itself doesn't send the vice president or the president or
Mm,
CEO, it's very difficult for that person in China to make things move forward.
yeah,
That's,
exactly.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of people don't understand that. But
Yeah.
yes, those are all great points. Now that we've talked about all that beginning stuff and getting through the trial, now you've finished and you have basically a publication in your hand. What's involved in publishing that trial?
Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. That's a last mile and to make everything complete. So as I mentioned earlier, after the trial, we have the SAR and CSR in place, which means statistical analysis report and clinical study report. And we are ready to write a publication because that is part of the final goal, right? Otherwise, why do you do a clinical trial? So for this, we partner with our collaborator. The name is eDance. They are specialized in scientific publications. So there are, I would say, several steps in terms of publishing a nutrition trial, but actually it's the same, basically, talking about the publication. So in general terms, first, we will help a global nutrition company with a journal selection. Why journal selection? Because even within nutrition, there are tens, hundreds, thousands of journals to choose from. So it's an art and a science to choose which journals you want to target to publish. And then we will curate a list of journals with the suggested authors for you to target at. And then, of course, the final decision is on you, the sponsor, and also on the author. Which I wanted to mention that remember in the trial there are principal investigators, and then after the trial, when during the publication stage, those people will be the authors. So we will continue to work with them. That's the first step. The second step is so after a journal is selected, and then we will help to write the manuscript And there can be several rounds, like the medical writers and us. We write it and then send to the author and the sponsor for feedback, for review, and come back and forth, back and forth. So it can be several rounds. And then when it's ready, it moves to the third stage. That is the submission to the targeting journal with a cover letter to show to the journal why this research is good for the journal's audience, why the journal should consider publishing. So submit. And then the fourth step is peer review, response to peer review. That's suppose that the journal looks at it and then they think that it's worth considering publishing, and then the journal will send to other researchers for review. And then normally they will have questions for you to answer to improve your publication. So it returns back to the author, and then we help the author and sponsor to address the reviewer questions. And then hopefully the journal accept the reasoning, the revision of the manuscript, and then that goes to the last step, publication. So for example, we have a previous, just recently, like this month or last month, we helped the authors and sponsor publish a nutrition trial. And then from the start of the writing to the publication, it only took 8 months. And then in the industry, it considered to be pretty quick because normally it can take at least a year, or if it's slow, it can take several years. So for us, it's usually like within a year. So pretty efficient. And then in this case, the sponsor and the authors, and then we continue to be engaged in this publication process. And also, I wanted to mention that when you talk about medical writing for the publication, there are good practices and there are not so good practices. How do you tell it apart? It's like in terms of the publication, many of us are called CMPP, which means Certified Medical Publication Professionals. That's why you can tell that the medical writing support is ethical and to a good standard. So those are the whole publication process. And then from the beginning, you have an idea to run a trial, and then all the way to publication. It can be a huge achievement, and you should be very proud.
All right. Amanda, thanks so much for all that. That's great stuff. Now, for those that want to, learn more or go a little deeper or maybe get in touch with you, how best can they do that?
Yeah. So the best way to contact with me is via LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And then if you wanted to add me as a connection, and please mention that you are part of this conversation. And then we also have our website. And I know Jeff will put my LinkedIn profile on the show notes for me to keep in contact with the audience.
All right, great. Yeah, we'll have a card at the end with all your info and the LinkedIn link in the notes. Well, thanks again, Amanda. Enjoy the rest of your winter there in Australia.
Thank you, Jeff, and enjoy your summer.
Okay, thanks. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to HPA Global Insights. Please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues. Any questions or suggestions, please email us at info@hpachina.org. HPA Global Insights is a nonprofit organization focused on the overall global dietary supplement industry. Please consider joining the association and supporting its endeavors. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, take care.